Well, it's time now to turn our attention to today's newspapers. Alison Sargent joins us for that. Alison, going to start with reactions to the arrest of the Belarusian opposition activist Roman Protasevich after the plane he was on was forced to reroute to Minsk.
That's right, Eva. He was flying from Greece to Lithuania when the plane was forced to land in Minsk due to a bomb threat that turned out to be fake. Russian paper Kommersant doesn't directly say that the Belarusian government was behind that bomb threat, but the paper writes that the forced landing was, quote, very beneficial for the Belarusian special services, which had been hunting for Roman Protasevich for a long time. Kommersant also writes that Belarusian President Aleksander Lukashenko has, quote, incurred the wrath of Europe with this arrest. Meanwhile, a former Russian Secret Service agent told another Russian paper, Vedomosti, that what happened really resembled a Secret Service operation, but they said that the Belarusian government is unlikely to ever admit that, especially because Protasevich has political asylum in the EU.
Indeed, in Poland. We are hearing a lot of international outrage against what has happened. We're expecting the EU Council to focus on it this Monday. A lot of anger really here in Europe.
Yeah, European leaders have called for an immediate international response. This story is also really front page news in a lot of countries in Europe today. The Financial Times explains that Protasevich is the former editor of Nexta Media Group, which played a prominent role in covering and directing the protests against Lukashenko last year. That was after he claimed victory in what the Financial Times calls a deeply flawed election. Some of the strongest words came from the Polish prime minister, who called it an unprecedented act of state terrorism that cannot go unpunished. And columnist Max Boot of the Washington Post agrees. He argues here that the force down of this Ryanair flight should be seen not as an isolated incident, but as, quote, part of a pattern of dictators testing the West with ever greater brazenness. And he continues, an erosion of international norms that is making the world a more chaotic and dangerous place.
Indeed, and we keep getting new reports from foreign ministers across the EU calling for a real edge to sanctions. So close eye on what's happening at the EU Council this Monday. But let's move here to France now. Papers reacting to an appearance by President Emmanuel Macron on a popular YouTube channel.
That's right, Eve. This is sort of your daily dose of French political news and French youth culture today. This channel is run by two YouTubers called McFly and Carlito. I'd never heard of them, but apparently they are very big in France among the youth. In this video, Emmanuel Macron joined them for a game that sounds like it's a bit like Two Truths and a Lie. Anyway, it's gotten over 7 million views since it went online on Sunday. Le Parisien reminds us that it's all really part of a calculated political strategy for Macron to attract young voters ahead of next year's presidential election. And Le Parisien writes that young people in France have been particularly impacted economically by the pandemic. Many are angry at the government and are being drawn for that to the far-right party of Marine Le Pen. Right-wing paper Le Figaro was pretty horrified by Macron's YouTube experience, though. In particular, the paper deplores the marketing mentality of cutting up voters into groups that have to be targeted separately, quote, without any regard for general interest or dignity. The paper calls the YouTubers idiots for allowing themselves to be used as part of Macron's political strategy. And for Le Figaro, the worst part is, quote, the idea that the president is an influencer like any other who would lower himself in such a vulgar video.
Well, and you found another story. It's about a high school in the United States that found photographs of vulgar, though much to the surprise of many of their students.
That's right, Eva. This high school in the U.S. state of Florida actually photoshopped pictures of female students who were showing any remote sign of cleavage, which is totally normal when you are a high school student in the US. You can see an example of the photoshopping here in the New York Times. Original photo on the left, a photoshopped photo on the right. The paper reports that they altered at least 80 photos, all of them female students. According to the New York Times, no pictures of male students were altered, not even a photo of the men's swim team, which showed all of them wearing nothing but teeny tiny Speedo bathing suits. A very good example of the double standard standards and something that we see not just with photos, but even with dress codes in high schools in the U.S. The young woman who's pictured in this photo told the New York Times, school administrators, quote, need to recognize they're making girls feel ashamed of their bodies.
Well, I tell you, that school definitely would not approve of the next photo or story you're about to show us, Alison.
Definitely not, Eve. This one is from French paper Libération. They're reporting on an apparent trend in the world and on social media. It's a wellness fad known as perineum sunning. The photo in Libé gives you a pretty good idea of what it entails, basically exposing your private regions to the sunlight. Now, you might think it's a smart idea for perhaps absorbing some vitamin D, but as we read here, it's not only ridiculous, it's also potentially dangerous. Doctors warn that those parts of the body are very sensitive. It's not a good idea to get them sunburned, which can happen quite easily, so best to stay covered up. And as you pointed out earlier, Eve, it's not a very practical looking pose anyway.
Alison Sargent, thanks a lot for that look at the international papers.